Sure.
All right. Dr. Bill Crawford, welcome to the Stones and Strength podcast. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. No, it's a pleasure to have you. And I mean, you'll be a familiar face for anyone whose entrance into this awesome world of stone lifting has been via the Rogue documentary Stoneland, which you had a fairly prominent role in. But for those who are unfamiliar with you or unfamiliar with you and your story outside of your involvement in that documentary, so who is Dr. Bill Crawford and how did he become Dr. Bill Crawford, the stone lifter?
So I basically grew up being told I was Scottish, which I am, so and we went to Highland Games as a kid. And no matter what I did as an athlete, even as a weightlifter, I made national caliber in Olympic lifting, weightlifting, and powerlifting. Played football in college. I was a state champion wrestler. Did all these things, but it never was Highland Games. And that's all I heard. It's not Highland Games. You're not a heavy. And we would go to Highland Games when I was a kid, and then eventually got out of weightlifting and went through medical school, and then started doing Highland Games right after medical school. And I met my poor wife, who has been very supportive. And through Highland Games, I met different people who were stone lifters. Steve Jeck, we actually trained at the same gym for a long time with Jack King, who was my mentor, my weightlifting coach. Bill Starr was like his best friend. I'm throwing names around, but that's just, these are the guys I was around. And Steve wrote his book of Stones and Strength, right? And in that book, because I'd moved to New England, for residency, and I ended up working there for a number of years. There were all the guys of Stones and Strength. John Lundstrom, Eric Sauvé, Robert Troop. I still talk to Robert Troop several times a week, and then so got into stone lifting, and then through Highland Games, I met David Webster, which that puts the garden hose in your mouth, right?
Yeah,
And so
yes.
we would go on stone lifting tours, and he would drive me around Scotland. And we would search for stones, and kind of the Fianna stone was it wasn't lost, but we struggled to find it. We found the blue stones of Old Daly shackled to the side of an old kirk,
Wow.
and so there was a lot of discovery inside of that. And Peter Martin Sr., who also wrote the book with Steve Jeck, got involved, and Peter Martin Jr. then got involved, and through him I met Martin Jancis, and so all this web of all these guys, we kind of find each other, and went on this quest to find all these stones. And it was so exciting to go around and find stones in Scotland, doing research and going through that. And in the meantime, through Highland Games, good friend Peter Goodmanson, who's a Olympic shot putter, great Highland Games competitor, like one of the top guys for a long time. And then my other friend Magnus Magnuson, might recognize that name.
Yeah, I think most people are in that one.
He and I grew up, in competitive days, and just sort of going through that process. And he actually helped me. He and Peter helped me find stones in Iceland, and then just me driving around, knocking on doors. People were looking at me like, "What are you doing?" Like, why is this American knocking on the doors and trying to find these stones? But we nailed down where the Dritvik stones were. Now there's a parking lot and a whole, like, a place, a placard next to the Dritvik stones, and right around the corner in a place called Grundafjordur is the Dritvik stones on the Snæfellsnes Peninsula in Iceland. And so made good friends with sort of the local guide there. My son actually went and lived with them about 2 years ago for the summer, work construction in Reykjavik.
Cool.
So, yeah, he himself actually, and I don't know if Ryan told you, my son was only 18 when he lifted the Husafell stone, carried it about 25 feet, and lifted the Denny stone at age 19. So he's steeped in this also. But so we made all these connections and started finding all these stones, and that's kind of and inside of that, I don't know if you guys remember Milo, right?
Sure.
Iron Mind's great. It was the premier strength publication for years, and through Milo, I was able to write about a lot of stones and uncover a lot of these stone lifting trips. And it just continued on as a passion and a journey. and just I was really bitten by it, and all along still doing still doing some strongman and a lot of Highland Games stuff, but it complemented all of it so well. It wasn't. And people talk about traditional Highland Games. They think about stone putting and weight tossing, cabers. But in real traditional Highland Games, there's actually, stone lifting was originally part of that as well. So that was obviously, a big part of that. That's why there's such a culture and a history there.
Right.
Yeah, but that's kind of how I got to it through other people. Was able to really say, wait a minute, there must be other things and stones to find, and kind of linked in with those guys. And Peter Martin Jr., unfortunately, as you know, he died several years
Mm-hmm.
ago, but he was doing some unbelievable research. And I've
Mm-hmm.
got stacks and stacks of papers that he was writing about, things about coffin roads. I don't know if
Right.
anybody, you guys are familiar with those, but
Yeah.
coffin roads. And
Absolutely.
Yeah.
we were driving out to places where it was basically these Gaelic speakers out in Scotland, and just this constant search for these stones. And I kept telling people in Ireland, particularly Stevie Shanks, dear Stevie Shanks, Jack's son. Everybody knows Stevie and Jack, those super legends in stone lifting. And I said, there are stones in Ireland. Keep pushing. Just like in Iceland, there's more stones than just the Husafell stone, and then the Driffic stones, and then all those other stones that we were able to kind of unearth and find and kind of resurrect, so to say. Just
Mm-hmm.
like David finding the Denny stones to pull out of the River Dee.
Right.
Yeah.
That whole story you saw in Stoneland where David's next to the River Dee. Actually, I've got a video clip of him from like back in the '90s, and it's a crappy old VHS thing. David explaining the same story to me,
Right.
and there's actually more to it. If you guys care to hear about that, but
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah.
so I was able to really get on the foundational layer with the main people that do these kind of
You're
things.
one of the original Avengers.
I guess it's just, and you know what is gratifying is that for years and years I was just some crazy guy that liked to lift stones, and you don't. There's not a lot of hoopla around it. Like
Right.
Steve Jeck said, basically between the millipedes and the squirrels, that's your audience. You know,
That's hilarious.
they're out rolling around these stones, and but anybody to me who, especially later on, we started getting video capability. Anyone who has the courage to video themselves doing it or document it and tell people if you failed or if you
Mm-hmm.
succeeded by those standards. But I think if you've trained and you've gone to these places, the journey is the success.
Right.
For sure.
You become stronger and better because of that. So if you're doing that, you have been successful.
For sure.
I think that's what I try to impress upon people. So share your results with other people. And you probably, if you can go to YouTube, years ago, there was all this discussion about is anyone actually carried the stone that's documented by video at Husafell,
Right.
right? So I said that's a good question, and I wasn't able to find that. So I trained up and I went there and did a full circuit carry and handed it over to Randall Strawson, and Randall put it on his on the Iron Mind website, and it went quote viral,
Yeah.
400,000 views in 1 month.
Right. Yeah.
Which
1,000?
today sounds like there are people that do that
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
trick in like a minute.
Yeah.
But this,
For
you got to
sure.
realize, this is when that kind of thing first started, and we
It's a
were
specific audience,
talking
right? It's a
Yeah.
about
very specific
technically learning
audience. Yeah.
stuff. Oh my gosh! But that took a month to pull together. But it was that was fun.
Yeah.
That was to kind of be a part of that, and then just keep the journey going, and just talking to the right people, and keep going back and back and back to the same places and learning and getting the people around those areas to discover their own heritage. Like
Mm-hmm.
before you just go to Husafeld and you knock on the door, and Jan Paul would come stick his head out the door and say, "Hey, I'm here to lift the stone." And he's like, "Okay, don't be too loud," something, the horses or something.
Yeah,
And go out and you'd go over and there's the stone lying there. Now there's a plaque. They built a hotel
for
near
sure.
there. Jan Paul's got like a whole, he's done so much around the area. He's kind of buffed up the place. And so it really turned into like it just kept going.
Yeah.
Then people started to recognize and identify with it. Used to the Denny's, now they're like, they moved for a while for the games. As you saw in Stoneland, we brought them back to the Patark Hotel, but we had the ability to get them back over there. Now they're kind of chained up and stuff. They used to just sit on the front porch of the old Patark Inn, and you just drag them out in the gravel and lift them and drag them back over.
Yeah.
Right.
That was it.
Yeah.
Nothing to it. And the first time I got to him, David took me to it. I was with Gordon Denny,
Okay.
who actually made the replicas, right?
Right.
Right. Yeah.
So Gordon was like he was pretty convinced that there hadn't been more than 10 guys that had lifted them actually barehanded. There was a lot of hearsay, but actual picture and some witnessing. So I think David Webster and Gordon Denny were probably good people to witness you lifting the stones.
I would think so.
I would say.
So I lifted them, and so I walked, and so I did them. I just walked over and like farmer carry lifted them, and they were like, there's another style. I'm like, well, what's that? So you straddle them. I'm like, oh, like Jack Shanks in the book. I'm like, yeah. So the next time I went, I got some Scottish guys to kind of show me that technique, and which is a better way to lift them, I think. So
You did side by side your first time?
yeah.
Wow. Because that's a more challenging lift.
Well, it was funny because you lift the smaller one and then the bigger one kind of comes up.
Right.
Not so much. you have to really lean and fight that one.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it was I stood up with him for a couple seconds and put him back down. I thought, okay, that was pretty challenging. And I was doing Highland Games at the time, so
Right.
but I hadn't really pushed myself to get really good at it and hold them for time or try to carry them for a few feet, which I did one time. But it is a process. So going back to the stones and then learning the history, Castlemingus stone, the Fianna stone, the Clochna Fianna, that whole story behind that.
It's amazing. We were there just over a year ago. We went to Scotland, and that was our first stone tour, and it's just absolutely incredible.
Yeah, Clochna Fianna's got a ton of history. I found from that geologist went there and thinks that, or archaeologists, and they feel that stone's probably been there 1,500 years or more, maybe 2,000.
Now, what would make them say that? That's fascinating.
Just the plinth that was sat on and
Depth of burial, probably. Yeah. How much
how
overburden there is
much
now.
because the plinth is just like 6 inches tall now, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And how long would that have taken? And sort of the whole history behind it. And but I have a theory about what the Fianna stone actually is. It was probably a Pictish stone, and it looks quite. It was part of some fertility rite, because when you look at it,
The shape of it.
angle, it looks like
It's got a specific form.
Looks like a dong, yeah.
Many people listening are probably familiar
I
with.
looked at it, I was like, wow, that looks like a.
It's a technical term.
I'm just saying.
Yeah, for sure. No, we agree. We lifted it.
And then have
thing
that.
too that's interesting about that stone is it's composed of dolerite, which is not like a native material to the area where to the Glen Lyon. So it was brought there from somewhere else. So it clearly had significance.
Or it was a glacier possibly, but I think it was probably brought there. That's why I would say it's probably like a Pictish stone. Was it some kind of rite and it just happened to end up there?
Yeah.
And you guys are familiar with the Fianna history a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit for sure.
You have to be able to lift the stone, put it on a plinth, run under a sword without breaking your stride.
Yep.
That's being held at chest height, and also jump the width of your kilt about 8 feet.
Yep.
Whether that's true or not, there were some other things too. You were supposed to be able to recite a poem while running full speed, and some other things that I don't, they probably got added on. Just like Fionn was actually a guy named Fionn MacHugh.
Yeah.
Who, and he what we call now Finn McCool.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So this real guy
legend,
turned into a giant.
Yeah.
So that's the beauty of this too. Is what's the real history?
For sure.
It's fascinating. Even just there's a gigantic tree, as you're familiar with, that's right next to that stone, and that tree itself captivated me. Like it's so old that the tree itself actually has picked up stones. They're embedded into the trunk of the tree. They've grown into it and been lifted up by the tree. So even the tree's lifting stones.
Yeah, it might have been. Yeah, that's a good point. It might have actually been there for Glen Lyon's a beautiful place. It might have even been there for an even a longer period of time than the 2,000 years. So because that tree is ancient. That tree is a minimum of 500 years old.
Well, that's what I'd be curious about too, because I would have to imagine, and this is just me spitballing here, but if you're going to put a stone somewhere, you're probably, because it would be hard to find, you're probably going to use a tree as a marker, right? It's going to be by that tree. You'd have to imagine maybe. And so if that tree would probably maybe predate the stone.
Yeah, probably so. Actually, it was in the farmer's barn for about 3 years, and not accessible.
The stone was.
So that took some negotiation.
Yeah.
Interesting. And you were involved in that?
Yeah, to get him to drag it back down. Absolutely. No question about it. Yeah.
That's amazing.
It's interesting, just sort of, you're clearly part of the foundational team that brought about an interest in finding and reviving and restoring these historical tests of strength. And it's cool. I mean, and I had never really thought about that in many ways. By you doing so, you're actually reteaching the locals of the area the significance of these strength artifacts, which they may not have known or clearly not appreciated before, right? The farmer's like, this is in the way of my sheep. I'm going to go drag it to the barn, not realizing how significant that stone was.
It's shocking because when you go to Scotland, you talk about the Denny stones, the locals around Petark and Aboyne know it. Yeah. Or maybe the Inverstone, because now it sits in Braemar at the game site, but it was Mrs. Richards' house, Mr. and Mrs. Richards' house, which I met Mr. Richards, and then he died, and then she lived some years later, June, but other than that, the locals in Scotland really don't know those histories, and they're becoming much more aware. Castle Mingus, it's become kind of a hotspot. They got people showing up all the time now.
Yeah.
The same thing so these tours, I kind of feel good about that, and I feel bad about it because I don't want the stones to be damaged or in some way, something to happen to them. So I'm glad that there is some understanding and some protection. As a matter of fact, the Husafell stone, they've got a plaque there that tells the history. It's actually illegal to take the stone from the site.
Right.
So when Magnus has his thing, he just keeps it right there,
Right.
So the people have gotten involved. But I will say the first time I went to Iceland and I stayed at a hotel, I kind of went in without telling my friends I was going in case I bonked. So I'm saying all this stuff about, you're like, oh yeah, you got to be brave and all these things and tell everybody what you did, which I eventually did. But I just snuck in for a weekend and flew in, stayed at a hotel, and I asked the lady at the desk. She said, so what are you here for? And I said, I'm here. She said, you're a strongman. I said, yes. And she said, what are you here for? I said, well, not a competition. I said the stone, and she gave me directions. We never said the word Husafell.
She knew.
No kidding, hey?
We never said the word Husafell. I said the stone, and she was like, this was some years ago, which she was, I'd say probably, she had to be in her 60s at the time, and she knew where the stone was.
Right. What year would this have been?
This was early 2000s.
Okay.
And then so in the 2008, Peter Goodmanson arranged for Icelandic television to follow us around and shoot a documentary. And so we got these big 4x4 trucks, and we drove all over Iceland with this crew and some stone lifters, Roger Davis, and a guy named Tony from Scotland, some other guys. Stefan Solvi Peterson went with us with Peter Goodmanson, and we drove around Scotland and lifted these stones, and we just found where Peter knew where the Lautervik stones were, and down the beach are two other stones, the Judas Stein and also the Brennhoff stock. And that was what we got all that together with the help of Magnus. So it was kind of a collective thing there. But having gone to Husafell and then gotten some information there, and we just kept building this information. Just to let you know, in the last 6 months, there was a stone that was thought to be lost. I'd heard about this stone that had been used as an anvil for a blacksmith on the northern coast, and it was unliftable. So someone found it, and for sure it had been used as an anvil, and rolled it out of the ocean, out of a fjord. It
No
sits
way.
on the beach and weighs about 400 pounds, so it is a liftable stone.
Oh yeah.
So they're still out there. And there's another stone called the Black Stone,
Yeah.
which is in Iceland, but it's on an island that you can only get to certain times of year. So there's still a lot of searching that can be done.
Yeah. Oh, I mean,
And that,
even if you look at what David Killen's doing in Ireland, similar to how you had said to Stevie Shanks, like there has to be liftable stones in Ireland. And you start to sort of pick away and then create a bit of inertia. And now he's got people that are messaging him weekly saying, there's one in my county and there's one at this crossroads and there's one here. And now just this year, 21 stones we found in Ireland.
that's how it starts. That's how it starts. The Pewterdock and the Pewdock and Balquitter, that was all, you get there and it was like, okay, you got a plinth. Here's the spot. Where's the stone?
Right. Yeah.
And then you go and we're like, well, somebody must have taken it. And then Peter Martin called me back and says, I got the idea to kind of search around. And sure enough, it had been rolled over in the bushes because it was a pasture.
It was pasture,
Right.
for sure.
Yeah, of course. Okay.
You don't want a horse or a sheep to twist their ankles on a large stone.
No.
Sure.
No.
So it was rolled over to the side, and he said, it has to be it. And the first time I saw it, I'm like, this is it. There's no question. Because they said it weighed a little over 100 kilos and kind of the general shape. So that was definitely a clocked feeder, a manhunt stone.
No, go ahead. This is awesome.
I have a question for you, and this is one that your perspective, even on like a global scale, will be quite unique on, because you kind of came in at the ground level and were part of the initial push that has created this insane global momentum around stone lifting and just this now renewed appreciation. How do you feel about it? Seeing now that there's just new stone lifters weekly, monthly, people doing stone tours, new stones being found. Like there's a buzz around stone lifting, at least in the circles that we run in, which might be a bit specific, but it seems like just this past year, like stone lifting has really just hit the map in a real big way.
Well, it's gratifying to see I wasn't crazy, because going around and going around to all these places and flying places, and again, my very beautiful and tolerant wife, was able to, she, small children in the house, and she would say, go ahead. She knew I was just itching. I call it stone crazy.
Yeah,
sure. I feel that.
You're going to go, and when you get there, you can't focus. People are talking and chatting, and you're just dialed in, man. You're just stone crazy.
Some people get that feeling for a different kind of rock. So I'm glad that
I feel like it's great. I feel like it's great that people are getting involved. Steve Jeck's Walking Stones. Steve died a few years ago, 2018, just a few months before Terry Todd. But Steve's the Jeck Stones, the kind of like smaller Denny replicas, are in my garage, and they're going to be carried. I've been taking the Highland Games to be carried, but in reverence to Steve, but they're going to be carried by the women in the Arnold Strongman Classic, as you probably know.
Fantastic.
And so that one weighs 206 and 219, so it's a 430-pound carry, which they're still they're evil. They just bite your ankles. It's awful. So it gives us a chance to expand into women also getting into it.
Yeah,
Can't be an organized sport with natural stones. It could be because as you see, some stones become revered by just the different different people who carry them and lift them. But what I want to make sure that everyone emphasizes, it's about the people. The stones themselves are not anything without the people. Then who are the people that have laid their hands on these stones? Right. What are the names of these people from ancient times, possibly?
Right.
The 2,000-year-old stone that it's engraved that says Eumastus lifted this stone.
Yeah,
right. That's too neat.
Or the son of Eumastus, to be more correct. So 2,000 years old in Greece. So it's, who are these people that laid their hands on these stones? And people can actually change their life with lifting these stones. So let's say that's Sweden is another place. So just in Sweden this year, and had got Kim Johansson kind of involved, and he's been finding stones in Sweden. Went to his gym and talked to him. He won the grip competition. Just a unbelievable grip. I mean, he plays with inch dumbbells like baby
All
rack.
right, hey,
Yeah.
good for
Thing.
him. That's a
Crazy.
tough lift.
He stands there. He just picks one up like a baby toy and just talks to you while and then curls it and puts it up on the rack. It's insane.
Bizarre.
But he's getting into the finding those natural stones in Sweden. But so in Sweden, you could carry a stone and prorate yourself as to how much you'll get paid
Mm-hmm.
to lift the stone
Right.
to be a worker. The Vikings, this is an old Icelander told me this. The Vikings would actually have stones. That's why they come in 3s and 4s, so that you can actually grade someone as to what stone they could lift. I might have written this in the book. I think I did, but that I wrote, or sometime in Milo also. But so you could lift either the smallest stone, the Amlothi stone, which would be cool, and then it keeps working up to half sturker and full sturker. But sturker, half sturker, and full sturker. But so if you lifted certain stones, you would get closer to the middle of the boat where the draft would be hardest to
Right.
pull with the oars, and therefore it means you're near the mast. And who stands next to the mast? The chieftain, the Viking chieftain. Meaning you get more spoils and favor in his ear, and you're in council, you're his bodyguard. Maybe you marry his daughter. So with lifting a stone, you could change your life, or you could get paid more, or reverence, or you could come in Scotland, you would get that feather in your cap that David talked about.
Yeah.
That's where that term came from, supposedly, and you would lift a stone and be able to then step up and be in your clan and a worthy person and get the man's portion.
Yeah.
Or sometimes it was in reverence of other people, and you'd be known for that thing, lifting that stone, just like in other places. That's why they name those stones. But it's the history of those people. And so every time I laid my hands on these great stones, I always felt the power of those other people.
Mm-hmm.
I became greater than I am through that energy that I would get from them. And I felt that, and I still feel that. I was fortunate enough to lift the Denny's last year at the gathering, and just felt like, that's another amazing thing, seeing all those people there, but just to lay my hands on those rings, and I'm like, wow, still how many people. And now there's, all these people that are going and lifting these stones. I feel good about it, but I want us to also, I never conquered a stone. I never became greater than the stone.
Right.
Felt myself fortunate to be able to go and lift the stone, or to be among the people who actually lifted those stones. Possibly
Participants create the purpose, right?
Yeah.
It's the people that give those stones meaning. Yeah.
Right, exactly. So, and to do it in a right way, doing it, I say it's, Steve and I talked about, Steve, Jeck and I talked about people that get it, people that lift stones in the right way, that you're going to revere these stones, and to not try to break them, even though they are just a stone. But, they take on a significance to us. So you want to revere them because you're revering all those other people who did that, and be respectful of that tradition.
And that's one of, like, I absolutely, before I head off here, and I apologize, I'm gonna have to go after this point, but I know Dale's gonna stick around, and thank you for your time. But that's one of the problem. I love this community so much. That's the only thing that actually irks me, is when I see the stones not being treated with respect. People that'll travel great ways, and they'll just drop the stone outright without trying to put any effort into setting it down lightly. Or there's one individual who said that he wanted to press the Husafel, and a few of us had reached out and said, we'd all love to see that weight be lifted, but do it with a replica. The Husafel is not meant to be pressed. If you dropped it, just take the task for what it is, respect that task, and if you can do more, find a different route to doing it. At least that's my point of view. I think it takes away from honoring the tradition of the carry. If you're like, well, I'm so strong I can press it overhead. Well, press something else overhead.
Yeah, it's not a gym implement. Yeah.
That's just my point of view. But, seeing people travel a long way up to the Strathmore of Durness just to pick it up and then drop that very fragile stone, that's where, where we hope that stuff, with the social media, with this podcast, that we can reach a wider audience to say, this stuff's amazing. It's great to see people get involved, but take care of those, because could you imagine if one generation of people started destroying these stones for the future generation so they couldn't do it?
Well, that's the thing. You don't want to be selfish in this, and it's a generational thing. Just like a history of stones that a history of stones that you want to make sure that you preserve, but you want to do it in the right way.
For sure.
And but stone lifting is so ancient. Stone lifting is so ancient. It does deserve its place among strength, and
Yes.
it's the strength training and strength in itself is not just something to get better at another sport to play.
Right.
Strength training is something. This is something.
Right.
This is more ancient than any sport with a ball.
Exactly.
Right?
This is the thing.
Yeah.
This is the original thing. There's a book called Song of the Vikings that was written by Nancy Brown. She's a PhD who's a professor in Vermont. And she thought I was crazy because I just called her directly. And I got her secretary up. She picked up the line, chatting with her about her book. But I was so enthralled because she describes the Althing in Iceland, and this is over 1,000 years ago. And they would gather to speak the law, make laws. The chieftains would, and to also arrange for marriages, sell and buy land, and then sport. And the two sports they would engage in was horse fighting and stone lifting.
Really? So it's
Over 1,000 years ago.
So she's found evidence that proves it goes back. Like we all would guess that it would go back that far, but she has.
Oh, yeah. And then you look at the Fianna. The Fianna. These were mercenaries from the Dalriada, which is 1,500 years ago.
Yeah.
And so it goes so ancient, and so we're well fed. We're not starving to death. We don't work menial jobs.
Yeah.
Everybody's not you're not overcome with typhus and tuberculosis and the Black Plague.
Yeah, we're not just surviving.
So, I don't know about you, but I comfortably go to these places and drink protein powder and lift weights.
Yeah.
And
pull
I
up in a Mercedes rental vehicle, right?
And then I go lift them. So if you were to really compare yourself to these guys, you want to do it as close as possible.
Yeah.
Tacky free, natural stones, tacky free.
Tacky free. Thank you.
Yeah.
It drives me nuts seeing people tacky up for some of these lifts.
I'm okay with a little bit of chalk, but
Sure. Chalk's
tacky free, and make sure that you're respecting the stones and to do it in the correct way, because these guys before didn't do it.
Well, that's good. And I mentioned this, I think it was on our last podcast, but like when we were planning to go to Scotland, when I was new to all this, even newer than I am now, is my thought was, I'm going to go there and I can, test myself against these guys of the past. That was the original thought. But then as we went and did it, my mind, without even realizing it, completely changed. And it didn't become about me testing myself against these men of the past. It became me being a part of the history and the tradition. There's no comparison. It's just I wanted to be involved in it and be able to honor it and just to do it. I lost the urge to compare myself against someone of the past. I just want to do it for myself now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. And so for a while, I've heard people dominate and all these other dominate and conquer. And I'm like, no, knock it off.
I know. Yeah.
That's fair.
Good. Be reverent, respect. I'll tell you a story about the Husafell stone. So, by the way, it's probably the first time I've actually said this aloud. I don't know if I'm the first person who carried the full circuit carry with the Husafell and lifted the Denny's.
Oh,
Those are two very different things. If you can find someone else, I'd be happy to hear about it. So the Husafell stone. So the first time I went, everybody wants to carry it with it kind of that upright V shape, right? And I lifted it, and I got probably 2/3 the way around, and I just didn't have. I felt like this isn't my way.
Yeah.
And I was with Eric Sauvé, who's in the book of Stones and Strength, and we were partners in crime. I can tell you this too: if you have a good stone lifting partner or training partners and friends, that's the best thing you've got.
We
Don't
do. We have a whole
underestimate
crew
that at
here.
all.
Yeah.
That's, man, just getting together with some dudes and lifting some stones
It's
is
the best.
gold.
Yeah.
That is the gold in your life. But
Yeah.
anyway, so Eric goes. He said, listen to the stone. It knows more about lifting you itself than we do.
Right.
I like that.
I turned it 45 degrees, and it was a more wider angle. I call it the big baby. And if you
Right.
want, if you watch the video clips that are on YouTube of me lifting, or any pictures that you may have seen, I turned it sideways, and allowed me to kind of get my arms
A little more of
under
a
it and hold it a little bit lower and put it on my solar plexus. Allowed me to breathe
Right.
right around. I definitely could have done more than the lap, but the point being, not my strength. The point being, the stone talked to me. I listened to it. I read it.
Yeah.
I let it give me its secret
Yeah.
I like that.
for me.
For
And
sure.
everybody's got a different secret inside that stone. Reading that stone, that only comes to maturity of time, of
Yeah.
being with stones.
Yeah.
So you see some guy that shows up, gassed to the gills and covered in tacky, and grabs it. I'm unimpressed.
I
Amen.
Amen is right. You're
Unimpressed.
defacing it, to be honest. If you use tacky on that historical stone, that's
Yeah.
defacing.
Yeah. So I just want to see more of a kind of a reverent way to do it.
Yeah, and I'm really sorry. I do got to take off to get my son from skiing. Thank you so much for your time, and I'll send you a message in a bit here. Thank you, Dr. Crawford.
Awesome. All right. It's a solo mission now.
Okay.
No, that's all right. And so, I mean, we sort of talked about your history and your involvement in finding, discovering, lifting stones, being one of the first people to lift some of these stones in recent history, and helping revive knowledge of these stones with the locals. One of the things, so I had become aware of you as part of the Rogue Fitness documentary that you had done, but then I also, in preparation, because I started stone lifting last May, and kind of David introduced me to it. He was preparing to lift for the Dinny stones, and I kind of, how you get that itch. Like, I tried lifting a stone the first time at his house on a Friday night, and I immediately was like, this is amazing. I need to do more. I'm like, if you're going to Scotland, like, I'm coming too. I hadn't trained or planned to lift the Dinny stones, and I didn't attempt them, but I was there to go on this tour and lift all these other stones. And in preparation for that, I was just trying to be as much of a sponge as possible. I knew I had a lot of ground to make up in those months. I didn't want to fly to Scotland and embarrass myself and not be able to lift these stones. And so one of the things that I did was David lent me the book that you had co-authored with Martin, which is titled Stone Lifting, an Ancient Test of Strength Revived. And that is for anyone who hasn't had a chance to read that, it's a fantastic resource, not just about sort of the history of stone lifting, the significance, but the different training techniques you can use in absence of being able to lift these historical stones to prepare for them. Can you kind of talk to me about the process of writing that book and the sort of tag team that you formed with Martin in doing that?
Well, we talked about it, and if everybody wants to do, there's 8-minute abs, and there's 7-minute abs, and there's 6-minute abs. Everybody wants to outdo everybody, and we weren't trying to outdo of stones and strength, because if you're or David Webster's books, I've got the small pamphlets that he wrote from 1959. About Highland Games, and it has something on the stones, and then his 1973 Highland Games book with Henry Gray and the whole history of the Dennies and the Inver, and about stone lifting in Scotland, and then of stones and strength was the next round. David also includes some stone lifting in his world history of Highland Games, but we just wanted to kind of have a broader reach and a little bit more in depth of our personal experience. But we didn't talk about Basque lifting. We didn't talk about which Steve kind of covered some stuff. We just really stuck to Scotland and Iceland. He covered most of Scotland, and I covered Iceland, obviously, because just those experiences. We didn't touch the Faroe Islands. I know South Sea Island people. I would love to include that someday. I wrote a Milo article. There's a man named Ari Tuatepa who had given me hundreds of pictures of South Sea Island stone lifters.
Right. Yeah.
A woman with a 110 kilo stone on her shoulder.
Oh my gosh.
These are some
Strong
people,
people.
man. These are
Very strong people.
some people, right?
Robust, strong people. Yeah.
But the point being that we just wanted to give our personal experience for the book and to do a little more in-depth writing about what we knew about it. There was gonna be it was gonna be with Peter Martin and the two of us,
Yeah.
Peter Martin, and I can tell you this, that the afterburners on his research was astounding.
Yeah.
Different types of things, but that he had brought up when we talked about coffin roads and lifting stones in reverence to a person, and then but over time, and then Roger Davis got involved. The dripping cave stone and all these other stones, but we just covered really more of the basic stones,
Mm-hmm.
and we did because Steve's book was kind of more of a Steve's book of Stones and Strength was more of a kind of a 6 inches deep and a mile wide, because he kind of went on a lot of different ones. We wanted to go more 6 feet deep and a half mile wide.
Yeah. Yeah.
Be a little more specific and concentrated.
Yeah.
Would I like to have published the pictures from the South Sea Islands and those kind of things, and then and I have some pictures from someone in Georgia, not the state, but the country, Georgia. They've got a great stone lifting tradition there. I didn't include those. I just went to the ones that we personally knew about and had been to more than once, and really dig into those things and get more in depth to the basic ones. So that was kind of the process, and we've made it a whopping $0 from the book. I think Martin gets a little bit here and there because we didn't put a surcharge on it. It's still under $30 on Amazon.
It is. Yeah. 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 It's very affordable. Yeah.
It's the printing cost, because the book, a book of that size and photo color could have gone for closer to $50.
For sure. For sure.
So we just said no. It's this is the original broke ass sport, so we're going to keep it that way.
Part of spraying the passion. Yeah. Yeah. Definitely.
But I think also I'd like to see more. So there's always this idea to keep natural stone lifting and top level strongman also.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the whole story behind the McGlashan stones. That was from the McGlashan lime work in Glasgow, and that's where Gregor's father Doogie and David Webster got the stones. And I've had a chance to and lifted the original McGlashans too. That was, talk about putting your hands on some history.
No kidding. Because I guess for anyone who doesn't know, those were those precipitated the creation of the Atlas stones, which are commonplace in strength competitions around the world now. So
yeah, we called them the McGlashan stones. Steve Slater makes some beautiful molds. Just to give him a shout out, if you want to make your own Atlas stones, they call them now.
Right.
Which I think that's a great term, by the way. But I think that natural stone lifting has its place, and particularly it does have a place still in strongman. It could be its own sport.
Yeah.
Stone sport itself, it could be, but it has its place in strongman. So I've every chance I get, I kick Colin in the shins about doing natural stones. I think a couple times I've been able to get through to him about it and keep that going. But it does work to show our history.
It does. Yeah.
The original world's strongest man, Terry Todd was the commissioner of power. He's the one who, came up with these events and really wanted to pay reverence to the old strongman.
Yeah.
And so this is the original way to do that, is through stone lifting.
Yeah. Yeah. It is the original test of strength. And I think and we've seen it more and more now that sort of stone lifting has picked up this momentum, but seeing dedicated stone lifting only competitions. And there's been quite a few that have been held in Scotland, like Jamie Gorian has held quite a number of those over the past year. And I think the thing that I really appreciate, even in the Arnolds, when they had the Odd Hogan tombstone, you get these guys who are masterful strength athletes and often struggle lifting a natural stone that is something that is, nearly or just above their own body weight, because there's the puzzle solving aspect. And to your point about the Husafell, many people, they will look at a stone and give it a quick read and say, this is how it must be picked. I will try. If I fail, I will try again. What's that? Sorry?
Everybody did it that way.
Right.
So
And
I'm going to do it that
so
way.
I'm going to do
So
it that way. Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
So I'll do what everybody else did.
That's
Well,
right. And not listening to what the stone is telling you or trying to, David and I were talking about this last week when we were lifting stones together is quite often you'll grab a stone and you'll get your hand on one good handle. And that might be, we said like, maybe this is an 8 out of 10 handle. This is a great handle. But on the opposite side, across the balance of the stone, is a 1 or a 2 out of 10 handle. But you feel like, no, it's a good handle. This is how I'm going to lift it. But maybe you got to give that up and rearrange a stone, find a new point of balance, and go with 2 4 out of 10 handles, because that's the way the stone is going to come up for you. And I think that that's what's so cool when you see them in these strength competitions, is that people have to engage their brain as much as their body to lift these stones. So
yeah, I went to we lived in New Hampshire. There was a stone that was in a park, and we took a meter over to it. My friend Dana Florence and Eric Sauvé, we took a meter to it, and it weighed 472 pounds. But it was a little bit long, and it did have an odd shape to it, and but it was a rough white granite, so
yeah,
you could definitely get your hands on
got
it.
some grip. Yeah, yeah,
It'd make you bleed.
yeah.
And so I worked on that stone for 2 years, and finally lifted it. 2 years.
That's yeah,
Finally stood up with it and got it to chest height,
yeah.
and fully standing up with the stone. By the way, the next week,
475,
472. So
472.
the next week,
That's madness.
the next week, the next week they it was a little bit longer and had some grain on it, but the next week it was incorporated into a wall.
Oh, jeez.
That was it. So I was
The
excited to
last
make
man to ever lift that stone. Yeah,
yeah, I was
yeah,
excited to to maybe drag it back home and
yeah,
because I'm really pretty selective. I have a ton of stones here at the house that I've collected over the years, but it's a it's something and again, it's not how much I lifted or what I did. It's that journey and that patience.
yeah.
2 years.
2 years, right?
Years.
And there's no incremental way for you to see that success. It's not like you had a goal to deadlift 600 and every week you're adding plates. It's you're making a little bit of progress. It's coming a bit higher. It's a bit higher, but the test stays the same.
Well, but that's the other thing. How many guys that I've had guys come over, powerlifters. Oh, I deadlift this and that, and they can't budge a 300-pound stone to save their
Yeah,
life.
yeah,
And then to go to strongman and I'm just stating what Mateusz Kołakowski was just did 4 lifts to the shoulder
mm-hmm.
with the Ode Haugen stone, and then deadlift's probably not his best event. I'll leave it at
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
So it's not a correlation there
No,
either.
no.
There's a lot of different aspects and components to it.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Absolutely.
having to be able to really reach down and get those stones, and then have the total body strength.
Mm-hmm.
You think a clean gives you all the different aspects. Man, stonelifting. The other thing is that stonelifting did help me with the Highland Games, at least with caber toss. I
Okay.
felt like
Yeah.
my caber toss kind of came up when I started getting good at stones, which
Yeah, I
kind
imagine
of
that sort of explosive leverage from that crouch position that you need to get a stone from lap to chest translates pretty well.
yeah. And so kind of that's a Highland Games kind of a thing that would allow you to to do that.
Yeah.
So it does have a lot of application. Chad Clark and I've been going, the last couple of years have been doing stonelifting competitions at Highland Games.
Cool. That's
And
awesome.
adjunct to that, speaking of, having and that's really popular.
Yeah.
It's very popular. I think because it's, tossing a caber, people know it's hard,
Mm-hmm.
or throwing a weight. But you've got a 300 or 400 pounds, 250, 300-pound stone, or 400 pound, whatever, or you're carrying stones that weigh,
Yeah.
several hundred pounds, on rings and chains. People get it.
Just awesome. It looks awesome. It's a simple concept. You're lifting a big stone. As kids, everyone tries to pick up stones, right? But it's just taken to the umpteenth degree. Yeah.
Everybody gets that.
Yeah.
And it, the speaking of the difference between barbells and stones, Steve said this, and he and I would talk, and we kind of came up with this idea that barbells were made to be lifted, but stones are defiant.
Yeah.
Stones are defiant. They fight you back.
They're made to stay put. Yeah.
They don't care about you. They don't have knurling.
Yeah.
They don't have balance. They don't have They don't have any of the components that a barbell will have,
Mm-hmm.
But you slap enough, 20-kilo plates on the bar,
Yeah.
that ergodynamic stuff goes out the door.
Oh,
It gets heavy,
exactly.
but
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
still just its own singular thing. How
Yeah.
many times you someone who's pretty good with a barbell and great with stones, or vice versa?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's funny. I've lifted some decent sized stones, and I don't have a strength background, but I do have a grappling background. I was a wrestler as well. I wrestled at national, international levels. And that's something I think if I could go back in time, if there was one cross training implement that I would put in to increase my strength and ability as a grappler, stone lifting, especially Greco-Roman style, where a lot of the time you're trying to pick up someone off the ground, can't touch their legs, you're trying to hoist them up and suplex them. Like stone lifting, an immovable object that you have to try and pick up. It would just that the translationary strength there is just like it's absolutely perfect. So
Well, speaking of which, the Bulgarians, back in the day, they're pretty legendary wrestlers,
yeah, absolutely.
and the Greek wrestling teams, they actually did lift stones. I
Yeah,
don't know if they do it now necessarily, but they did. They did years ago when they were, particularly the Bulgarians.
yeah,
But they lifted stones. I can't say if the Russians did or anybody else,
yeah.
but definitely wrestlers did lift stones
Yeah,
or did
hips,
lift stones.
legs, glutes, forearms, wrists, back, like everything you need strong to be a good wrestler. No, it makes
Absolutely,
total sense.
yeah.
Yeah, and I guess so. Another thing I was kind of curious because you had mentioned your son earlier, who at 18 picked up the Husafell stone. I know he's also a Denny stone lifter. So with you and him being probably the first, other than Donald Denny and his father son combo to lift the Denny stones. Talk about what stone lifting has meant as sort of a family endeavor for you and your son.
Well, he grew up in it. I mean, I've got video clips of him in a diaper watching World's Strongest Man and like
Yeah,
kind of flexing and grunting and pulling out a 10-pound medicine ball, and
yeah,
he got his teeth started. Like pictures of him, I made little stones and fine little stones, and
yeah,
so he got that natural feel for it. And if you watch the video clip of him lift the Husafell stone, he turned it sideways,
hmm
right?
yeah, yeah,
He didn't reach down and pick it up or stand it up and kind of swing it into your lap.
yeah,
He turned it sideways and
yeah,
locked his fingers and stood up with
yeah.
it.
Sort of
And the
a bear
Icelanders
hug.
were very excited by that
Yeah, yeah,
because that's the old way.
right.
And that technique was taught to us by an Icelander.
Yeah,
That's the
very
old way.
cool.
That's why Peter Goodmanson would lift that stone, the Husafell stone, or the Driffic stones. And
Yeah,
that's the old way. So that was just his, having listened and learned these lessons
yeah,
and lifted. And he went to the Driffic stone the same day and lifted the full strider Driffic stone, blew it away because it's much lighter.
yeah,
He just blew it away, just stood right up with it. I was like, wow. But he turned it sideways
yeah,
and got it up and then rotated it and stood up with it. I mean, but that's the way the Icelanders did it. That
yeah,
was the old way.
yeah,
And so I think it takes more flexibility and athleticism, to do it that way.
yeah,
But for us as a family, he just grew up with it, and so he dug into that volume, and I'm standing there with him, talking with him,
yeah.
and that was his 13th try to lift the stone,
No
and
way.
he just knew that if you stick with it, you warm up, you read it, you get yourself in the place.
Yeah,
And if you watch, it's very well orchestrated because he reaches his fingers around. There's a little tiny groove. The first
yeah,
time he saw the Denny Stones, he was 4. I've got a picture of him and David Webster and I standing at the Denny's, in the Inverstone, and they've seen the Roosevelt Stone. They were like 8 or 9, I don't know. They were really young. But he
yeah,
reaches around, got that, and got a groove, and that was his handhold, and stood up with it, and turned the stone, and stood up with it, and walked. So yeah, it's been a family thing for us. So
yeah.
yeah, you talked about the Denny's and then the Shanks and then us. That's pretty rarefied company.
That's right.
But
Yeah, yeah,
Billy and I lifted the Denny's on the same day, which was and people
right.
were like, "Oh, I think Billy can lift them." I'm like, "He's going to kill him." He had the 5th longest hold in history, like 27 seconds or something. I said, "If anybody's going to blow this, it's me." I was 60 at the time. I said, it was last year. I just turned 60. I'm like, if anybody's going to blow it, it's me. But he actually did. He did a great job. He
Yeah,
just Great job. He's a very, very good stone lifter, by the way.
Yeah,
Just very natural, got great leverages, and just knows how to read the stone and pick them up. He knows
yeah.
how to lift stones. Um,
That's awesome.
yeah.
Like, grown up with
Very,
them, I mean, in many ways, like that's a pretty amazing legacy that you're leaving for your family, in specifically with regards to stone lifting. But if you're talking sort of on a bit more of a global scale, what would you say would be, in your mind, your greatest contribution or the most important contribution you have made to this now sort of more global stone lifting culture?
well, maybe just to have help expose it some. I hope that I've contributed the respect, and also when I talk about them, that I'm not talking about myself.
Hmm.
I'm talking about the people before me.
Yeah.
David Webster, the Denny's,
Hmm.
Banks, all these other great stone lifters and people who have done so much more in the work. Maybe
Yeah.
I've helped expose some of it and keep it in light or bring it to light. But that's all it's about.
Yeah.
I just I'm a super fan.
Yeah.
I'm a
Yeah.
super fan. I'm not this not any kind of you know like unbelievably. I'm not a half Thor. You meet that guy in person, like, wow, that's the real thing. Whereas me, I'm a fan,
Yeah.
and I'm able to lift these things and have the opportunity to travel and do them. But all I want to make sure is that people see that it's for everybody.
It is. Yeah.
Every person should lift a stone.
Yeah.
I can only lift a 50-pound stone. Pick it up.
Yeah.
Everybody can do it. It's a very fundamental thing.
Yeah.
It's not something that should be excluded. I don't want to make it where it's yes, can you lift some of the historic stones, because now so many people are doing it, and now women are getting to where they can actually lift some of these stones, and great. I mean, this if that's if that's the light you can shine on the world, and that's to the world from yourself, then do it.
Yeah.
Accentuate your strength. That's great, but always do it the right way.
And that's such a perfect message too, because that's something we've tried to sort of advertise with this podcast as well, is that you can find ways to contribute to stone lifting. You can find ways to build community, like David and Troy Pahara, who's at Beard and Boulder on Instagram. They created a group here in Edmonton where we do not have historical stones, at least that we know of. They created the Edmonton Stones of Strength, and from that has precipitated a stone lifting community. New people have come in and learned about stone lifting and gotten involved and gotten passionate. They've been holding events. Like, it's as simple as finding stones, advertising them, creating tests of strength for other people, and
Well, make your own stones.
everyone can
Make
do
your
it.
own stones.
Exactly.
Make your own stones
Absolutely.
for it. The
Yep.
nickel stones, the
Yep.
Jeck stones.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah, make your own history,
Yeah.
because they came from somebody.
Yeah.
Not gods,
Yeah.
not giants,
Yeah.
just men.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
who it was.
Yeah.
Donald Denny was a living, breathing man. He was
Yeah.
somebody who had his faults. He's not this superhero.
Yeah.
Louis Cyr. He was he was just a man with exceptional abilities who has lived through the ages through these feats.
Yeah.
But make your own history.
Yeah. 100%.
David never lifted any of these stones, but he is the history, because he resurrected them. Where would we be without David?
Yeah.
I went to a funeral last month, and that's all that kept going through my head was, what would we have done without David?
Yeah.
He really helped preserve Highland Games through the World Championships, which I've been fortunate to be involved with. But stone lifting itself, he found the Denny stones,
Yeah.
found the Ember stone, brought them to light, helped introduce stone lifting to World's Strongest Man, and continued that journey.
Mhm.
Where would we be without that?
Yeah.
And then doing the footwork to get those stones together. So
Yeah.
if you want to have any part of this, is to be, even if you never find a stone or a part of finding a stone, if you can continue that legacy in the proper way, or maybe make some things happen, doing it on a local basis. Is it possible to expand stone lifting where more people have access to these
Mhm.
things, or maybe link it up where Japan's got a stone lifting history,
Yeah.
collecting history in Georgia, the South Sea Islands, the Faroe Islands,
Yeah.
Scotland,
Yeah.
the Basque Country, Ireland,
Yeah.
Iceland. Why not the U.S.? Why not
Yeah.
Canada? Make
Absolutely.
our legacies.
Yeah, and we have a page that we host, and people send us information about new modern stones of strength they've created, and so now we have a centralized map of a lot of the modern stones of strength that are popping up all across North America, and it's the map is getting filled up quite quickly, so people can go and say, like, I can't travel to Iceland or the Faroe Islands or Japan to lift stones, but I can go over to Utah, or I can go down to Colorado, or I can go to New England and go do a stone tour there because people are creating these stones of strength circuits.
Well, some of these stones are kind of closed off to access too. So it's
Hmm.
you have to find the ones that are okay. There's a stone in New England that's 200 kilos that's on display. It was in a museum, and I went there and asked some questions and picked it up on the platform. Since then,
Yeah,
they just they didn't want to have it out. That caused a little bit of a stir.
just
I'm
one.
like, well, the history is that somebody picked it up, so
Yeah,
that's why it's here. So
that's right.
yeah, so I made a on the site decision to say the story was that it was lifted by a freed slave, a man who bought it, freedom, and had lifted this stone, and it's in Connecticut in a museum. And I think they've locked it up since then. But
Yeah,
but the point being, there can be history here.
absolutely.
Make that history.
Yeah,
Go ahead
absolutely.
and start now, because in 100 years, what is the history?
Yeah,
What is the history? I'll have to admit that one of the stones in Iceland was a stone that had been lifted, and Peter and I just call it the Peter Stein, and
yeah,
you climb up a cliff overlooking a fjord, and it's and the Peter Stein, and then you've got the Fjordfoss behind you, the mountain fall,
yeah, yeah.
200 feet wide. I can send you a picture of me lifting that stone. It's broken. Someone broke it since then, and it's only
You hear that?
it went from about 210 kilos now to is legit 210 kilos now, weighs about 175. But it was a big block, and you put it on a plinth. The most beautiful sight you'll ever lift. But we actually just said, he said, "Wow, that was great." We lifted the stone. It was for the Icelandic, the documentary we're shooting. And I said, "Well, this is you're the king of Iceland, so Peter Stein
So you're telling, yeah,
on the spot." And
yeah.
so, and now people travel around and lift it, and it's part of their
That's
culture to go lift it, and nobody knows the real story.
yeah,
We made it up on the spot. It's
that's
named
great
after a
though.
living, breathing man who walks around.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's awesome. Well, I mean, in talking about history and legacy, like clearly your legacy associated with stone lifting is quite well cemented. And so I'm curious, sort of considering all you have done, what still excites you about stone lifting? Is there a specific trip you would like to do, or a specific stone you've got your eye on lifting?
Oh, I mean, I can still lift some pretty heavy stones. I'm being more practical these days. I'm
Mm,
61. I can still lift some pretty decent stones, but I like to see my son go after some of the stones.
yeah.
But I'd like to see more exposure to the Faroe Islands,
Mm,
uh, stones there. The South Sea Islands. There's a festival on the island of Ruatua. I wrote an article in Milo about this.
oh,
Um,
amazing.
so they travel around the first week of the year, which is the middle of their summer, and they have a stone lifting tour. And there's probably about 15 stone sites, and every time they stop and lift a stone, they'll have a feast and some prayers, and it kind of it's the start of the new year. If the
Right,
stones are strong and they lift the stones well, then they're able to go the rest of the year with a bountiful harvest, and the people thrive.
right.
So that's the belief. I'd love to
Interesting.
go see that one year.
Yeah.
Something like that. Martine's has done a great job. Martine's Lisis and
Hmm.
Romark Weiss have done a great job of doing some documentaries in
Yeah.
China,
Strength
finding
unknown. Yeah.
Chinese strength unknown,
Yeah.
Chinese, Japanese. I knew the Japanese stones were there, by the way, and I was
Yeah.
really trying to get there. We couldn't. That was as a target for the Rogue films for a while, but
Yeah. Romark was
because
actually on this podcast for episode
that's
7.
how sumo started.
Yeah.
Sumo started with that.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, I'm a big sumo fan. If you want to watch something that's really about strength, as a wrestler. I'm sure you watched it, but
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah.
yeah, there's a lot of different places. No one talks about Georgia, and I think, and I will guarantee there are stones in Africa.
Oh, absolutely.
1,000%. I mean, their wrestling culture there is deep.
Mm-hmm.
India has a massive wrestling culture.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
And also a lot of interesting stone lifting techniques there as well.
Stone lifting there,
Yeah.
Pakistan
Yeah.
stone lifting.
Yeah.
Man, so what would be my dream? I need to hit the lottery and just disappear for a year.
Chart a course and disappear for a year. Hey. Yeah.
Yeah, just and I'll need some diplomatic resolution for some of these places because they're pretty remote.
Yeah.
I'm sure the Mongolians have a culture as well.
They do. Yeah. So actually, Romark Weiss was on the podcast, episode 7, I believe, and it was the night before him and Martins were flying out to Japan. And we talked, and he had talked to us about the Mongol stones they have there as well, and just
Yeah.
the incredible feats of strength that some of those people do.
Well, it's like the Moss wrestling. Speaking of stoneless, my son was made podium at the World Championships last year in Moss.
Yeah.
At the
Amazing.
110 kilo class. He was 19.
Holy
That was
smokes.
pretty good. That's pretty good.
Amazing.
But the idea though that they have in Yakusha, they have stone lifting as part of their training and competition with the Moss wrestling.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, Siberia. There you go.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just it's uncovered in place after place after place. We talked about Sweden, also in Estonia. That's where oddly named the Russian lion, but George Hackenschmidt. There's stones there. There's stones in Latvia. There's stones in Lithuania. There's stones in Denmark that I've heard of.
Yeah.
There has to be stones in France. There are stones in Austria.
Yeah.
In stone in Switzerland.
Yeah.
That no question about that. And they're just place after place. In different ways, maybe with a handle, like in Bavaria.
Right.
There are just stones in all kinds of places. So you can't tell me that there aren't other alpine countries like Italy that doesn't have a stone. Is there a stone in the Pyrenees? I would guarantee there's one. It's a rocky place.
Yeah.
Near Spain, near the Spanish territories, near the Basque people.
For sure.
No question about that.
Yeah. Absolutely.
There's got to be a tradition there as well.
Yeah.
There's no question about it.
And if there's not, if you're listening and you're from any of those regions, start your own, because there are stones there to be lifted, and people will come and lift. Yeah.
Yep, they will. They
Absolutely.
will. They want to try their hand at something that only maybe one or two people have tried.
Exactly.
Can you imagine the thrill that it would be to actually lay your hands on a stone that is new, and then you can be on the ground floor of that.
Mm-hmm.
That can be very exciting also.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Bill Crawford, thank you so much. I just, the future of stone lifting is bright. This community on a global scale is growing, and a lot of that is attributable to the people like yourself who have been so instrumental in reviving its past. And so for myself and the other people listening to this podcast, thank you very much for your contributions to this community and culture.
Well, thank you and good luck, and thank you so much for having me on.